Hello everyone, welcome to the final video in the Monopoly videos section of this YouTube channel. I thought it would be a good idea to make a video like this and just call it Monopoly Practice Quiz. I thought it'd be a good idea to make this video so you guys can, I guess, kind of gauge your progress on how well you've been, taking notes on the material and retaining the material up until now. So before you watch this video, I do recommend you taking the time to look at all of the other videos that I have posted about Monopoly to this YouTube channel. You can find them in the Monopoly playlist under the playlist section on this channel. So the main way that this video is going to work is that the next slide is going to show a bunch of questions that, if you have taken the time to watch the videos up until now, you should have relatively little problems answering these questions, or at least knowing where to look back in the videos to find the answers to these questions. After you've taken the time to look at these questions, maybe try to answer them yourself, I'm going to go through and briefly, concisely answer these questions so you guys can get some kind of idea what kind of answer I was looking for. If answering these questions is a little bit difficult for you, I highly recommend you taking the time to maybe not sit through all the videos again, but maybe skip through the videos and try to take, better notes in certain sections, or just stopping by my office hours or Corey's office hours, or even one of the Niedermeyer review sessions, so that we can help you with any questions or concerns that you may be having with the material up until now. If you feel like, these questions are really easy and straightforward, then you can probably say that you've done a pretty good job either taking notes or retaining the material through this virtual fashion. So if you can answer these questions, you're on a pretty good track to being successful when it comes to the problem set questions about monopolies and the exam questions dealing with monopolies. So enough of me talking. So here are the questions that I think are probably the most important for you guys to be able to answer after hearing and, I guess, consuming all of the material about monopolies up until now. Why do monopolies arise? How do profit maximizing monopolies determine the profit maximizing quantity to produce? How do profit maximizing monopolies determine the profit maximizing price to charge? What is price discrimination? What are the types of government policies enacted to help control monopolies? And then what are some similarities and differences between perfectly competitive firms and monopolies? So what price do they charge? Are these firms able to make long-run profits, etc.? So if you guys want to pause the video now, take some time to try to answer these questions on your own. Once you do that, you can play the video again to see my answers to these questions. And like I said, the answers that I give are going to be very brief and concise. If you want more details or explanations, I highly recommend referring back to the videos that have already been posted. Hello, welcome back. Hopefully you've taken some time to pause the video to try to answer these questions on your own. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So the first question that I asked you guys was, why do monopolies arise? And I guess the simple answer to this question would just be barriers to entry. Now, we know from perfect competition that firms in this perfectly competitive world, there are no barriers to entry. Firms can enter the market as much or as little as they want. But when it comes to firms that are acting like a monopoly, there are these things in place, which we call barriers to entry, that make it really, really hard for other firms to produce whatever good or service that we're talking about. And there are many, many different types of barriers to entry that we talked about in the first video of this section. So some examples of barriers to entry would be, ownership of a key resource that's needed in the production process. So for example, De Beers owns all of the world's diamond mines. So if they're the only company that has access to diamond mines, of course it makes sense that De Beers is going to be the only company that produces diamonds. We also talked about a lot of different types of government regulations and laws that, make it possible for monopolies to arise, whether this be patents or just straight regulation of prices and things like that. And, monopolies can also come about from just being the most efficient producer of a certain good or service. So combining all these ideas together is what's just called barriers to entry. And this is what makes a monopoly, it's one of the key defining features of a monopoly. So the second question was, how do profit maximizing monopolies determine the profit maximizing quantity to produce? So graphically, a monopoly is going to choose the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, just like a perfectly competitive firm. If you want more details about how this looks graphically, again, please refer back to the previous videos about monopoly. So, choosing the profit maximizing quantity, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. How do they choose the price? So from that profit maximizing quantity that you find, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, the monopoly is going to choose the price that lies on the demand curve for that specific quantity. So remember, if you find the intersection point between marginal revenue and marginal cost and go straight up to the demand curve, that will show the price that the monopoly is able to charge for that quantity. Again, if you think back to what the demand curve represents, the demand curve represents the marginal person's willingness to pay for different quantities. So because a monopoly, due to barriers of entry, is the only firm making the good or service that we're talking about, a monopoly can charge that maximum willingness to pay for that quantity because no one else is there to undercut them or drive the price down. So quantity is marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but the price is all the way up to the demand curve. What is price discrimination? So price discrimination is basically charging a different price for different groups of people. So we gave lots of examples in the lecture notes. We talked about, movie tickets being a different price, matinee versus evening movies. We talked about airline tickets being different prices, on different days of the week. And also need-based financial aid was another example that I gave. Is like, not all of you may be paying the same amount to go to college. Some of you may get need-based financial aid, so you pay a different price for the same education as someone who doesn't get need-based financial aid. So price discrimination in general is just charging a different price for different groups of people. So how does this relate to monopolies? Well, we connected this idea of price discrimination and monopolies in terms of, maximizing social welfare. And that if a monopoly, in theory, is able to perfectly price discriminate, know every single person's willingness to pay for this good or service, then there would be no deadweight loss. So total surplus would be as maximized as it could be, given the fact that we're in this monopoly situation. Now, we also talked about in this video, dealing with price discrimination, that this ability for a monopoly to perfectly price discriminate is just something that exists in theory. And it's pretty impossible for a monopoly to know every single person's willingness to pay for a certain good or service. And then we ended the videos about monopoly really hitting on the different types of government policies that are enacted, I guess, to help control monopolies. So there's a wide range of different policies that exist that the government can enact if they feel that a monopoly is not the most efficient way to distribute a certain good or service. So we talked about antitrust laws, and we listed several very historic laws that have been put in place, for over 100 years, that basically prevent mergers and, kind of encourages competition. A government can also just directly regulate a certain monopoly, and this is quite popular for natural monopolies. So like an electric company who has a natural monopoly in a certain area is usually regulated by the government to make sure that the price that they're charging isn't too exorbitant. So not too high and it's kind of fair. So the government can directly regulate monopolies, and this is mainly just to make sure the prices don't get too high. And then we also talked about very briefly that if the government wants to control a monopoly, they could just outright own the company. So the government can therefore pull all the strings behind the scenes to pick the quantity and the price for the company. And then we also mentioned that there are some economists that say maybe it's not such a good idea for the government to be enacting all of these policies concerning monopolies, particularly when we're talking about natural monopolies that just happen naturally. And maybe the government shouldn't interfere with those kind of monopolies. But again, it's kind of, very opinionated. There's a lot of, normative statements, if you remember what a normative statement is. So again, there are many different things that the government can do about monopolies, but there is still debate about whether or not they should do these things. And then the last question that I asked you, and I think it will be, really important for you guys to remember when it comes time to problem set and exam, is just knowing some similarities and differences between perfectly competitive firms and monopolies. Now, even though these firms are on two very opposite ends of that competition spectrum, there are some similarities between these two different types of firms. And some of the similarities are that we're assuming in both perfectly competitive firms and monopolies that the goal of the business is to maximize their profits. And the rule for maximizing is choosing the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And in both perfect competition and monopoly, these firms are able to earn short-run profits. But there are quite a few differences between these different types of firms. Again, with perfect competition, there are many, many, many different producers of a certain good or service, but if there's a monopoly, there's only one. So because there is only one firm, they have some, I guess, more flexibility in terms of what price they can charge. But if there's perfect competition, they're kind of constrained to only charging their marginal revenue as the price, whereas a monopoly can charge a higher price than their marginal revenue. We also talked a little bit about how perfect competition maximizes total surplus, the total welfare of an economy. So if there's perfect competition, consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized. But with a monopoly, because a monopoly is able to charge, a higher price than the marginal revenue that it gets, they can kind of, have this markup of a price where not as many people along the demand curve are benefiting from that price as if there were more firms competing in this market. And in the long run, we discussed that because there are many, many firms in perfect competition, more firms can enter the market or exit the market. But because there is free reign for firms to come and go in perfect competition, they earn zero long-run economic profits. But due to, barriers to entry mainly, because other firms cannot come in and try to compete with the monopoly firm is able to earn long-run economic profits. And then the last thing that this chart has is that monopoly, because there aren't other firms competing with it, they are able to price discriminate if they want. So they can charge different prices for different groups of people. Whereas if a perfectly competitive firm tried to change the price that they charge, then no one would buy from them because all other firms in this perfectly competitive market are selling the exact same thing. So if one firm tried to charge a lower price, then no one would buy from them. And they would just move to a different firm because they're selling the exact same thing. So hopefully those questions were pretty straightforward and they all made sense to you guys. So yeah, again, if you didn't do so well answering these questions, I do highly recommend that you go back and watch the other videos that I've made about Monopoly so far. If you did do well, then good job. You guys have been I guess taking good notes and really retaining the information in these videos that I've been making for you. So I do plan to make more videos like this for all of the remaining sections in the class, and hopefully you found this video quite useful. Bye.